the progressivist narrative that the Labour government is circulating and a lot of leftist pundits are circulating is crucially mistaken, because they are making it all about the reaction to a particular crime and its causes rather than the crime and its causes. This is not to deny that agitators exist. I come from a country that knows a thing or two about protests, and I know how protests are being often hijacked by people who just want to do bad things and defame the entire protest.
Just a quick aside. I visited Greece in 2012, and I was on holiday there, and there were massive protests in Athens, and I had a girlfriend at the time, and we were just like, what the hell is going on? You know, it was huge. But anyway, yeah, the Greeks definitely know a thing or two about protests.
Yes. So just by bringing the far-right dog whistle into the mix, the shift of public attention has been towards the reaction to the events, not to the tragic events of this week. Keir Starmer had a press conference yesterday. He addressed the British public and also some journalists who found it a good idea to ask him about stuff other than the events. We mentioned before someone who asked him about the BBC and Hugh Edwards. And Keir Starmer made some really interesting points in this address. He mentioned the issue of public safety. He also drew a distinction between the community and the riots, because he's a politician and he didn't have as hard a left line as a lot of leftist pundits had. And he also said that public safety is of paramount importance, and those who are a threat to public safety are going to feel the full force of the law. Now, I think that one of the things that happens with a lot of the pronouncements of Keir Starmer is that they are very much traditionally wooden politician-like statements. They're so abstract that you can always say, yeah, I agree in a very abstract sense. But the point is that we cannot just stay into the abstract. We have to bear in mind that when we're talking about laws, there are people who apply these laws in particular cases and people who interpret them. And sometimes they apply it with double standards. And what is particularly interesting to note here is that there is an element of hypocrisy that is coming out, because, as I said before, there are dangers to public safety, and the people who engaged in these protests, their main concern is that they feel unsafe. Now, some weeks ago, there were a lot of events, some of them in Leeds, that showed a lack in law enforcement. And there were videos circulating. I will show you some of them to refreshen your memory of events. They communicate to the public that we cannot enforce the law.
Yep.
And because when people see this, they feel that the law is not there to protect them. They feel unsafe in public. So one of the major things that the majority of the British public has in their minds right now is that they feel unsafe. And Keir Starmer had an opportunity to actually appeal to a significant portion of the British population, and actually did not.
And he, in fact, sided with the minority.
Exactly.
The sort of 3 to 4% of Muslim population. Because if you look at, who's actually being listened to here?
Yes.
The Muslim community says, well, we're worried because these guys attacked the mosque. And Keir Starmer says, yes, well, I will defend your mosque.
Yes.
The British public said, we're worried because we're worried that multiculturalism might involve dead children. Yeah. Keir Starmer says, shut up, you bigot, and you're not going to be allowed to protest.
So this was a golden opportunity that Keir Starmer had to actually address working class people of the UK and engage in dialogue with them and actually recognize concerns about public safety.
Yes.
Because it's not much to ask from a state to ensure public safety. Well, apparently it is, but it should be the number one thing that a state provides
And
to
Starmer
people.
admitted this as well.
I mean,
Yes.
this is even worse to a certain degree because Starmer has not only shown that he is unwilling or unable to provide some kind of safety to the population of this country. It could have been a very easy win, or at least something to try and contain and calm down the rising tensions right now, if he had come out and even just made it clear that he understood the concerns. Some people say that this is what somebody like Tony Blair would have done. Perhaps he would have, but the complete lack of any ability to competently handle the situation from a PR perspective shows that there's a complete failure of statesmanship. This was the perfect opportunity to calm things down. Instead, he pointed the finger, he threw out accusations, he slandered and labeled people who were upset.
Exactly. So
He declared war.
rather than doing what he should have done, he actually doubled down on an ultra-ideological narrative that presents the British population basically as having a civilizational guilt for which they have to atone themselves by cultural self-implosion. And I will show you how all this comes down to one particular point, and how what he said about public safety is something that a lot of people cannot actually interpret as meaning safety for all. The question arises, safety for whom? Because precisely we see nothing but double standards when it comes to this ultra-ideological cancer called wokeness that the Labour government is recreating. And I want to say, I have a paragraph from a tweet I had. We are told to not look back in anger and be unburdened by what has been. But the very people who say this bombard us with an ecophobic message that asks us to part with our cultural heritage and identity in the name of addressing historical inequalities. So this is not something that is designed to appeal to all people. This is a narrative that the Labour government is doubling down on, which is precisely a narrative that divides the population into groups, into oppressor and oppressed, and is actively recognizing more rights to the oppressed groups, and it gives them preferential treatment. So I want to show you how there has been a consistent double standard applied in several cases when it comes to a number of events across the last few years, to show you precisely how there is talk about isolated incidents and noticing patterns, because these are some phrases that are somehow hot topics or are considered a bit spicy. I will say this, that whenever something happens, whenever someone engages in a crime, there's political discussion about how this crime can be understood and also utilized for political means. This is, I think, uncontroversial. So the mantra of the left is, for my friends, isolated incidents; for my enemies, patterns. So whenever there are crimes, what happens is that there is a whole machinery from the left, coming from the left, that is basically projecting all kinds of patterns to incidents that don't have to be read this way. So I will say this because, in one sense, every incident is an isolated incident, but in another sense, we can only understand isolated incidents in terms of understanding patterns.
I don't know. I'm getting to the point where I'm thinking there aren't really isolated incidents, that everything is a part of a series of events that led up to it. But,
yes. So I have a number of slides to show you. Here is the BLM riots, where we had the killing of George Floyd by Derek Chauvin. And there was a whole machinery of projecting a lot of patterns, not just to Derek Chauvin, but eventually to the entire US nation.
Yeah, this wasn't an isolated incident in them.
Exactly. In their mind, this wasn't an isolated incident. Derek Chauvin, the murderer of George Floyd, wasn't just seen as the murderer of George Floyd. He was portrayed as the representative of the essence of the US police force, the US system, and
the white population,
and its institutions, and of, arguably, according for some voices, for the entire population. And the slogan, "I Can Breathe," was the slogan of the 2020 summer. Have you seen anything like this when it came to the murders of Monday?
No.
There is no slogan from the left like, "We don't want our daughters to be macheted." or we don't feel safe. There was no such thing. It was all portrayed as an isolated incident, a mental health incident.
Something that just couldn't be prevented.
Yes. Keir Starmer here with Angela Rayner kneeled in opposition to anti-black racism. So they actually doubled down upon their narrative. And they didn't condemn the riots from these protests. They didn't draw the distinction between the riots and the protests that they did here.
During COVID, they were allowed to riot.
Yes.
They were allowed. Everyone else was locked in their homes apart from the black community, which were allowed to get out and do damage.
So by doing this...
racism was a far greater pandemic than the pandemic, if you recall.
I heard that, yes, yeah.
Yes, so what they did was not basically to say that there are illegitimate riots, because there is a lot of use of force and a lot of burning things and a lot of looting. They didn't say it's a crime. They actually bent the knee.
Yeah, they recognized the legitimacy of it.
Yes. So here we have the other unfortunate event, the murder of Sarah Everard. Yep. This was presented not just as an isolated incident. There were several patterns projected, not just upon the murderer, but there was a whole narrative of femicide. And by talking about femicide, there was a very abstract presentation of the murder, and it sort of gave nebulous accusations for all men.
But also, the police force themselves were declared institutionally misogynist and etc., etc.
This is why we need more tiny, weak, incompetent women in the police.
Yeah. The point being, it wasn't isolated.
Yeah. Keir Starmer didn't see it as an isolated incident. He projected the pattern onto it, and he said the Conservative have just voted for legislation that does nothing to address violence against women and girls.
I never realized how beady his eyes were.
Now, we have the other unfortunate event, the brutal murder of Brianna Ghey. Again, this was portrayed as anti-trans violence.
Yep.
And the people who said this talked about this as being an endemic feature of society, of Western society. They didn't just say it's an isolated incident. They projected a whole pattern upon all the population, virtually the entire population of the West. And they were particularly happy and trigger happy to equate every person who has ever expressed gender critical views with someone who would want something like that, which is a blatant lie. Now, when it comes to the pro-Palestine protests, now that's an interesting thing because London was vandalized. There were monuments desecrated for months. Am I wrong to say that this lasted for months? And Keir Starmer himself was confronted by a lot of angry pro-Palestine people. Do you remember him making any pronouncement about it?
No. Not at least not in condemnation of it, anyway.
Yeah, and there were also rumors that a lot of people were outside his house, outside his home, and chanting bad things to him and curses because they disagreed with his stance on it. I haven't heard any press conference of his that is as condemning of these protests that were violent as the protests and riots of last week. Here again, we have several people from the pro-Palestine camp doing salutes that Keir Starmer was saying that a lot of the far-right thugs in these protests were doing. But apparently, again, I haven't heard any other condemnation. Right, now we come to something different. Now we come to other events when the victims belong to groups that are not groups that are protected by the left. They're not designated. One of that is, well, it's not a group, it's an individual. It's Trump. But you could say that supporters of Trump are being targeted precisely to a ridiculous extent by a whole machinery of propaganda that says all people who support Trump basically are for destroying all freedoms in America. And they even portrayed him
they've been calling him a dictator,
they even constantly portrayed him as Adolf Hitler. Now, there was an assassination attempt against him, and the mainstream media, rather than just rushing to portray and project patterns upon the incident, upon the murderer, actually had a different response. A lot of them for a long time, for the first hours, had really weird titles in their articles. Here are from some articles: Trump escorted away after loud noises at Pennsylvania rally. Secret Service rushes Trump off stage after he falls at rally.
Yeah. And you saw a lot of downplaying of it initially, where it just became out. But when it became evident there's too much footage of him actually being shot, that it couldn't be downplayed.
Have you seen the new footage that came out?
Where you could see the sniper on the roof?
Yeah, from the different angle, from behind Trump at an angle, and you can see him running along the roof.
Yes.
And even the FBI director came out and essentially spread a conspiracy theory. Well, I mean, we don't know he was shot. It's like, yes, we do.
Well, just look at the double standard. Whenever there was a victim from a group that is protected by the left, there was a whole machinery of propaganda that tried to project negative qualities among the entire population of their political opponents. And this was something that they did, but didn't assume responsibility for. That was an isolated incident. That was a lone wolf. So we have here people who rushed to portray the murderer, Axel Rudakabana, in a very interesting way, as someone who did what he did because of Western internalized whiteness, let's say. So we have Dr. Scholar saying Axel Rudakabana is a 17-year-old Southport murderer, black British Christian, born and bred in UK, not Muslim, nothing to do with Islam, and not immigrant on small boat. Everything he knows, he learned from Britain.
Really? He didn't learn anything from his Rwandan parents?
So all bigoted racists have to weaponize now is that he is black. So I think that this is very mistaken. And this is even worse than people who would just say, oh, it's an isolated incident. This is not an isolated incident. This is to project patterns on it, but it's to say that basically this is internalized whiteness.
But also, it's to project the pattern that Britain is evil. And Leo's completely right. Well, I mean, if we're turning people into murderers, we probably shouldn't let them in.
Yes, exactly. Right, so we have Wanjira Njoya, who makes a good claim here. She asks, why is Lawrence Fox under fire for wanting to remove Islam from Britain, while Dr. Shola is not under fire for wanting to abolish whiteness and eradicate whiteness from the face of the planet? That's just another. Right, so what we have here is a narrative, an ecophobic narrative that is applying double standards and is legitimizing double standards. And we see these double standards here in Yvette Cooper's response to the Harehills incident and the Southport incident.
In the interest of time,
yes,
I have to speed up a little bit.
Yeah, we will have to speed up. I'm approaching the end of my segment.
Sorry.
We have spoken before about it, but she was notably more aggravated when she was dealing with...
She was furious.
She was furious. Right, so we have all sorts of footage here from the Leeds incidents. You can see what they communicate is basically lack of law enforcement and lack of the ability of the state to ensure public safety. No press conference was staged there. And actually, this is one of the reasons why a lot of people are led to think that basically they are not represented by the Labour government and why they have to protest. We have here several leftist pundits that I want to end with. And we will show again how hypocritical they are. So we have Ian Dunt here saying, we need to be really clear here. These people are racist thugs.
Oh, wow, that's really original, Ian.
Yeah, yes.
Really original. You haven't called anyone a racist up until this point.
They're a clear threat.
So I'm glad you're really just making it very clear you think people are racist. Oh, thank God.
Yeah. He says these people are racist thugs, and he ends with a chilling. Each and every one of them should basically do what he writes there.
Hang their head in shame.
I mean, I do agree that, yes, the Rwandan who murdered white children seemingly for no reason probably was a racist thug.
Well, not even questionable, really.
Now, if we can search what Ian Dunn said about the Leeds riots, we will see something really interesting, that we can't find something. We cannot find any, let's say, strong condemnation of the riots there, and a strong criticism of the ability of the of the police to enforce the law. We find nothing. Let's go to Paul Mason here, another
Paul Mason
journalist.
calling people racists.
Yes, there were racist mob incidents last night in Hartlepool, Manchester, Aldershot, in Whitehall, in each case stoked by online disinformation. History tells us this could escalate, so we need swift arrest and sentencing of those inciting and committing violence. He has a thread there. Interestingly enough, what did he write about Leeds and about the events that happened there? Can we please search Paul Mason, Hartlepool, Leeds? What we will see is yet another incident where he basically wrote nothing. We can't find something. If he has, I'll admit I am mistaken in saying what I'm saying, but we couldn't find anything. So Josh has a good Chadish response here to Paul Mason. He says, remember when the ruling class tried to make conspiracy theories a right-wing thing? Here is a left-winger saying that people are rioting because of Russian disinformation rather than being angry at murdered and wounded children.
It's incredible they brought the Blue Anon conspiracies over to the UK as well. Oh, it's all Russian. It's all Russian disinformation.
Yeah. And I'll end the segment with something that shows the tendencies of the Labour government when it comes to dialogue. Because what happened here is that Keir Starmer and the Labour government missed a golden opportunity to engage in dialogue with the people who they claim to represent, who they're supposed to represent, and whose interests they're supposed to promote. And they didn't. And what they are going to do, they are battling freedom of speech. They're cracking down on freedom of speech, and they're basically trying to make academia even more problematic when it comes to expressing people's opinions and criticizing the government. And all this is a move that leads into turning academia and turning the young generations into activists or people who just passively support progressivism, not to people who are going to embody civic ideals of being critical of the government, because the government is not the country, they're not identical, and care for the interests of the country has got to imply that people are subjecting the government into criticism, and people are focusing on obligations bilaterally, not just obligations of the people to obey to power, but also obligations of those in power to obey the will of the people who they're supposed to represent.
I hope you appreciated that segment from the podcast of the Lotus Eaters, and if you want to see what else we're up to, you can go on our website and watch Bo's series, Epochs, this one about Cato the Younger. So if you're interested in history, definitely want to check out. And if you want to see all of the other work we're putting out, you could follow us on Twitter, our official account, where we post links to everything we're putting out so you don't get to miss a thing. Thank you very much for watching, and goodbye.